Here we see an Irishman in his natural habitat, the untamed wilderness. The Irish are a peculiar species. Shunned by civilization as they dare to be gingers, these specimen have adapted to a life in harmony with nature. Roaming the vast continents of Ori, they seek for nothing but the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. That's right, today we're playing Outward as an Irishman, Seamus O'Shane in this case. Because of his unfortunate disability, we inherently despise civilization and civilization despises us. As such, beating the game won't be easy. We under no circumstance want to enter a human city. And well, we do still have to do a questline though, so for that we're gonna enter, talk to the necessary NPCs and get out as quickly as possible, not picking up or buying anything. Also, because the Irish don't concern themselves with the trifling matters of humanity, we're gonna do our best to fail as many quest objectives as possible. Now, not being allowed in cities of course means that not only will I have to sleep in some decrepit shithole, but also that I am barred from most skill trees. There are only 2 that I can learn, but I'll be talking about them at the relevant time. That's enough yapping, let's just get started. I went through the tutorial as usual. After escaping the frenzied horde's deafening blabbering, I ran over to the storage area as swiftly as my little leprechaun legs could carry me. I didn't have a backpack, nor any good weapons or skills you'd have otherwise acquired by this point, but at least we got a bedroll, which I dropped. I don't know why I did that. My current lack of a backpack is also why I crafted the leather armor for 5 extra pouch space. Would I have been able to just make myself a satchel out of the same 2 pieces of hide I used to craft the leather armor? Yes, but consider that I'm a fucking idiot. I easily killed the troglodytes and shed a single tear of sadness, as I am very sympathetic towards these creatures, as sympathetic as an Irishman can be. They are, after all, outcasts just like me, but also this is a dog-eat-dog world, or rather a leprechaun-eat-leprechaun world. So I had no choice but to end their miserable and short lives. On the beach, I spotted another disgusting specimen of a human being. He was bleeding out, but sadly, for some reason or another, I didn't have any bandages to share with him. I then killed a hyena, made myself a fly Balenciaga hat, and cooked up some meat. Again, could I have saved that hide for a backpack? Yes, but as they say, you either drip or drown, and I wasn't about to become a statistic, so the hat was absolutely necessary. Also, talking about cooking up some meat, I hadn't really thought about it at this point, but food would become one of the most pressing problems for me. Not only was access to marshmallow and tartines severely limited, but also I of course didn't have access to many things preventing decay, as the alchemist and preservation backpacks were both unobtainable for me. For now though, some cooked meat was enough. Killing some more hyenas allowed me to then finally craft myself a makeshift satchel. See, the hat was not only essential, but optimal. This also left me with ample predator bones to turn any iron weapon I might come upon into a fang weapon. At this point, I made my way towards the southern bandit camp, picking up some gabberies along the way. Now, this bandit camp was actually extremely important to me, as here you are guaranteed to pick up a cooking pot, which would give me access to much better food, including gabbery tartines for acceptable stamina recovery. In the chest here I also found a brutal club, which, as it has high range and inflicts confusion, made for a marked improvement over the pickaxe I had been using up to this point. In the second chest I found even more extremely useful stuff. A pair of padded boots would finally allow me to cover up my meat clumpies, keeping both foot injuries as well as Miyazaki at Yep. His name shall not be spoken, I guess. There was also an alchemy kit in here, so I would be able to brew up some health potions should I find the necessary ingredients. I then picked up the cooking pot, and even though the junk pile gave me an iron sword, theoretically unlocking the fang sword for me, I was much more keen on a two-handed weapon, as all of the good offhand options require skills my reviled Irishman was unable to acquire. Not really confident in my ability to kill the Wendigo without any further preparation, I instead headed towards the lake near Ghost Pass. Here I was relatively close to many of the points of interest I was intending to clear out, and also the supply cache directly next to the safe sleeping spot made for a pretty good camp. Now, as I just mentioned, I was not really confident in my setup here, so to get some more easy upgrades to my build, I paid a visit to the Immaculate's camp. And for probably the first time in human history, I intentionally went for the adventurous backpack. 10 extra capacity, a lantern slot, and unimpeded dodging was honestly a pretty massive upgrade, especially considering that the only other backpack I could acquire in the Kusanese was Mufino's, locked behind RNG. The chest was also really quite generous, 2 health potions, and the brutal knuckles were far from bad. I went to try them out on some hyenas and a bandit. Have I mentioned yet that I'm playing in hardcore? Well, no I have, and this shit was way too close for no fucking reason whatsoever. Having learned very little from this near-death experience, I, for the first time, hung shoot in my humble abode. Well rested and without any stamina bonus whatsoever, I made my way over to the Conflux Mountain, entering the Heroic Kingdom's path. I dropped down, got the mantis shrimp, and sought Golem to duke it out while I was snagging all of the valuables. Very luckily, here I got a Prayer Claymore, one of the better early game options. Sadly, I of course couldn't use pommel counter, but the range and attack speed still made for a pretty decent armament. I then stepped into some traps like an absolute tool, but still easily dispatched of the Sword Golem, weakened by his fight with the Rock. If you haven't guessed already, my goal here was getting a Golem Rapier assembled, a very good greatsword early on. Also, in a stroke of probably somewhat ordinary luck, I got a basic ass tent from a junk pile, so I would at least get a 5% stamina bonus from sleeping. With the Prayer Claymore, I made pretty quick work of the rest of the dungeon and headed to the Conflux Chamber. No, instead I first entered the Blue Chamber's path. Reason was the Palladium vein in there, only I, without fail, always forget which turns to take, so I got lost in there for like 10 minutes. Whatever. Now arriving in Conflux Chamber for real, I got 40 mana. Now, since I was intending on failing every single quest for my chosen faction and wouldn't be able to learn any related skills, my HP, stamina and mana were from this point onwards fixed at 90, 90 and 40 respectively. Kind of annoying, especially the low stamina, but well, don't have much of a choice, do I? And since I would heavily rely on 2 spells, just going for 20 mana wasn't really an option. On my way back to camp, I took out a Wendigo, which wasn't particularly hard, just had to wait a whole bunch for my stamina to come back. Having gotten some rest, I then thought, having my Prayer Claymore and all, that I was ready for a little bit of a challenge, so I entered the Voltaic Hatchery. The first 2 Larkies were easily killed with the help of tripwire traps, and the ranged one was no problem either. These guys have 80% resistances to physical damage. This fight took 2 fucking business days. I also accidentally aggroed the Gold Matriarch wait, what? Why is this thing called a matriarch? Did the Gold Lich fuck a mantis shrimp? Not only does this mantis shrimp on crack have 80% physical resistances, but it also has 6 protection, so I just kited it further into the dungeon, then ran back, grabbed the ornate chest and left. The half-plate boots I got weren't particularly great, especially since this chest has a chance to give you pieces of the black plate set, but it was an upgrade for my flesh flop paste nonetheless, and I was also left with 2 Gold Lich mechanisms, meaning that should I find an Iron Claymore, I could then also craft myself a Gold Lich Claymore, which I would honestly much prefer over the Golem Rapier. Now, since the Voltaic Hatchery is the hardest dungeon in the Kusanese by an incredibly wide margin, I felt like I had just gained 5 inches to my cock coming out of there alive, so naturally, looking for a new and more rewarding challenge, I set out for the Ghost Pass. Conquering it would probably result in the single biggest power spike in this playthrough. I would not only be guaranteed a Golem Rapier, but also be able to unlock the Hermit, one of the only 2 skill trees I'd be able to learn. So I made my way through the hallways pretty effortlessly, aided by the ethereal varnish picked up in the beginning. The Golem had already seen premonitions of its demolition, so it wandered off into the starting courtyard, forcing me to open up the shortcut, but also giving me ample time to set up tripwire traps, leaving the Clanker, Hada, no chance. This gave me the second broken Golem Rapier, along with the crystal powder that I needed for the construction of the repaired Golem Rapier. In comparison to my Prayer Claymore, it dealt 7 more damage and 8 more impact damage at the same attack speed and roughly the same range, so a pretty nice upgrade that would last me until my first unique weapon. I exited the Ghost Pass and immediately stumbled into the Shell Horror. I froze, trembling in utter terror, maybe even wet my pants a little bit. Then proceeded to absolutely shit on him, not even getting hit once. That was kinda anticlimactic, but sure. I activated the Wind Altar and entered the home of my fellow recluse. Since the old knobhead's gone mostly bald, only having faint hints of grey hair left behind, I cannot possibly ascertain this myself, but I do suspect that he's afflicted with the same horrid curse that I am. gingerness. Here I was only able to learn the skills up to and including the breakthrough as I didn't have enough money. Especially useful was mana push. It was only one of two active skills I'd be able to reliably use, the other one being push kick of course. And for that purpose, mana push was basically a direct upgrade. It deals 100 impact damage at a deceptively long range, which would turn out to be an incredibly useful tool in combat, especially considering that I couldn't use anything else, so whether it was good or not didn't really matter. However, the main attraction here was Infuse Wind of course, and to get that I needed to gather some more loot. I cleared out the basement, but sadly I was still left shortchanged, since Affirm as a viable payment option and the associated Depth Trap debuff will only be implemented in Outward 2, I had to head to the tombs to scrape together enough money to buy Infuse Wind. On the way I also picked up the half-plate helmet, which completed the set. Such drip. The tombs were pretty trivial. I bonked in Myriad's noggin, picked up an iron halberd and pounded the Wendigo. He dropped the brigand armor, to which I switched as, well, it looks better, but also has slightly better resistance, no penalties and gives throw poach bonus. He also, of course, dropped occult remains, so now I had enough materials to craft myself a horror halberd. Cool alliterative name aside, if you've been watching me for a while, you'll know my stance on horror weapons. I fucking hate horror weapons. So I sold the piece of shit and was now able to afford the rest of the skill tree. And with that I had finally acquired Infuse Wind. It's the best infusion in the game, increasing attack speed by 0.2 and impact damage by 50%, which is fucking ludicrous. At this point I was headed back to camp. However, there in the distance I spotted a caravaner. Well, would you look at that, he's got an adventurer armor. Sadly, I couldn't afford it, so I moved on. I sold the golem rapier. Honestly, I am really not quite sure why I thought this would be even remotely worth it, but, well, let's just acknowledge that mistakes were made and forget about this. Okay, it's fine. Back at camp, I did luckily keep my prayer claymore. I cleared out the vigil pylon area, hoping for a lucky iron claymore drop somewhere, but it was futile. To feel at least something, I then scoured some supply caches and got reasonably lucky acquiring 2 power coils. What welcoming decor! Clearing out the Montcalm camp was really quite elating, as not only did I pick up Mefino's backpack, but also it almost made me forget my poor decisions of the past. Almost. That's because this dickhead kept blocking my attacks, so to regen stamina I had to engage in a Looney Tunes-esque chase sequence. In the ornate chest I found an iron spear, meaning that theoretically I could craft a gold lich spear. However, spears are for pussies, and since not a single person watching this has one, only great swords are allowed on this channel. I sold the loot to the hermit's indentured slave. She is probably English, and gathered some blue sand. Yeah, at this point I was basically mentally already in Amakar, but my desire for an iron claymore kept me from actually going there. Also, I had yet to fail Call to Adventure, which was needed to have all the necessary NPCs move on to different towns so I could join a faction. Though while on my way to the Vendible Beach, that finally happened. Oh no, my lighthouse is gone. What shall I do? After taking out the shield guy, I then, again in hopes of finding an iron claymore, entered the Holy Mission's conflicts path. To optimize backpack burden, I used the shield and club dropped by the shield guy, which almost got me killed, but let's not talk about that. Instead, sad news, I did get an iron claymore, but hey, at least my cold unfeeling leprechaun heart was filled by the warmth of some gold bars. Also, I engaged in combat with and subsequently defeated the unique Tyrannosaur, a pretty menial task. After sleeping, I then got jump scared by the normal version that had no spawn instead and took it out without problems. I took a look at the Trog infiltration, and besides the beautiful architecture, nothing there, no iron claymore, so I moved on. On to the pirate hideout with a spooky skeleton. Sorry, I got scared. Well, at least he dropped an emerald. Now, at this point, running around with my prayer claymore, I was pretty desperate. Determined to not leave the Kursneys without a gold lich weapon, the last dungeon I could possibly think of that could have an iron greatsword was the Troglodyte Burrow. Yeah, this time I did actually get really lucky. I promptly went back to camp and crafted this absolute beauty of a greatsword. After having sweet dreams of my long schlong, I returned to the Troglodyte Den and did to it as a US American high schooler in need of therapy would to a school. This joke has been removed by your favorite payment processor. Yeah, fuck those guys. This also marked the first time I made use of my ghost body, though I am being very generous with my use of the word use here. Then again, back at camp. This, ladies and gentlemen, well, just gentlemen, may have been the biggest mistake I made in this entire run. I crafted a scale armor along with an Amalite helmet and boots. No, by no means is this a bad armor combination. The 25% physical damage bonus alone made this worth on the gameplay level. However, I had all the ingredients to instead craft the full Amalite armor, and I didn't. Look at this absolute slob of an Irishman. Now, despite being social menaces and outcasts, they are typically much more keen on not looking like absolute fucking dog shit. However, yeah, that is in fact the case. Absolutely disgusting. Well, whatever, it's not like anyone's gonna see him like that. I sold some more stuff, cooked up some Michelin grade health hazard, and then I had to Antisocial. I sprinted through the wild town and got all the NPCs to move on, and left again. Thank God. And then, finally, I traveled over to MK. Now, picking up camp and moving on, having to decide which things to leave behind was actually a really interesting choice that doesn't usually occur, as you can just put your stuff into the home chest. Generally, besides food management, this was probably the most interesting aspect of this run. Setting up camp in an opportune location and only carrying with you the essentials, more so interested in survival rather than amassing as much coin as possible, was a nice change of the gameplay loop. Anyways, MK. Almost got my shit kicked in by an ash giant, but we ball and killed him anyways. Then did some spelunking in the hives, and as they call me, the Master Baiter, I easily looted everything there without actually engaging in combat. I set up a camp in the western Manticore area, as there's a safe sleeping spot there for whatever fucking reason. After putting up an assembly of tripwire traps longer than most aviation runways, I lured the Royal Manticore into them, but the wild beast seemed unfazed. Somehow, this brave man managed to defeat the legendary creature for me, and I rewarded him aptly. Now I had acquired the Starchild Claymore, an upgrade over my Gold Lich Claymore in pretty much every aspect outside of range. Does that mean that I probably could have just kept my Prayer Claymore and gone to MK much earlier without having to search for an Iron Claymore? Yes, but stumbling through the Royal Manticore's lair, I very easily killed the beta normal Manticores and picked up Zorn's hunting backpack. It decreases stamina costs by 10%, but that didn't matter to me. Rather, it was the only backpack I could acquire that reduces food decay, not to the same extent as the Alchemist and Preservation bags, but it was massively important nonetheless. Not having anything else particularly desirable up for grabs, I then moved on to Abrasar. Another fellow outcast and former NBA top draft of the year 1534, the Immaculate had now been joined by me as his roommate. Outside, I found a pair of Entomber boots, and that set would be my next goal for an upgrade. It has pretty high resistances and, most importantly, reduces stamina costs by 15%, which, as I was locked at 90, was pretty high on my priority list. Killed the Shell Horror, bought a tent from the Zoroborian, got the Possessed Boon from my new roommate. However, after waking up, he was gone. Now, I did rip a massive fart whilst sleeping, however, I would assume that that was not in fact the cause of his departure. After activating the Wind Altar, I killed another Shell Horror and got an Elite Desert Veil, and while it didn't provide a damage bonus, it still reduced my stamina costs by 10%, so I switched to that. I then had to enter Levant with the goal of joining the Heroic Kingdom, of course. Now, why exactly the Heroic Kingdom? Well, I don't know. It didn't really matter regardless, as I wasn't planning on making use of any of the faction rewards, so I thought I might as well join the faction that will instigate a war and has no concept of social warfare. Warfare? Welfare? Okay, that's one hell of a Freudian slip there. For some fucking reason, the caravan was still right next to my camp, so I sold some stuff, slept, and entered the electric lab. Why? Again, I don't know, I need to pass some time to start the first quest, I guess. There I found the Entomber hat, that despite offering less stamina cost reduction than my veil, had me dripping all over the place with style, so I didn't see a reason not to use it. I then dismantled some clankers harder with my ghost body, looted some of the ornate chests, killed a manticore, and yet I still could not find the elusive Entomber chest piece. Something Abrasar was really quite convenient for was, ironically, food. I gathered as many cactuses as I could, and killing the abundance of bugs that allowed me to make a whole bunch of spiny meringue, which gives good HP and really good stamina regen, effectively taking care of my lack of especially stamina food up until this point. Almost broke my ankles in the hive like a fucking moron, got body blocked by the beetles and almost died again. And again, didn't get the armor piece I wanted, but hey, at least some more lava eggs for delicious meringue. Next up, I entered the bottom of the Stone Titan caves, killed the guy in the silver armor, who, in an act of magic, dropped an entirely different garment. I didn't complain, the Elite Desert Tunic had some nice upgrades to defense and stamina cost, so the search for the Entombed chest piece was less urgent, especially since it paired quite nicely with the rest of my drip. I then moved on to the Sandrose cave next, admired the beautiful graphics, and got nothing worthwhile yet again. Inflicts cripple on shield charge. Literally unplayable garbage, what the fuck, 9 dots. Next up was the slide, and I almost considered sliding down even further into hell than an Irishman usually could by becoming a furry Irishman. But luckily I decided against that. I then started tending the flame, headed over to Enmekar, witnessed the blue chamber blowing up, and then left for the caldera as terrorist attacks posed a problem. Sure, just not my problem. The reason I wanted to stop by the caldera was quite simple, as I'd be able to get my second skill tree here, the Ritualist. But honestly, unlike in my Merton run, here I really couldn't get much use out of the skill tree. That's for several reasons. For one, the deployment. In my Merton run, I had the Brigand Backpack, which allows for unimpeded rolling, which is almost necessary to deploy these things. They're just way too heavy to have in your pocket unless you're wearing the pilgrim armor or whatever. If you don't have access to a backpack that doesn't inhibit dodging, you're gonna basically always get staggered trying to get these things down, and in the worst case scenario, get stunlocked and die. And the only two backpacks to allow dodging I could acquire were the Adventurous Backpack and Scaled Satchel, both severely lacking in capacity to the point where I'd struggle to not be overweight even without loot. And yes, the Bazoo Backpack exists, but I couldn't enter the Antique Plateau reliably. The only way I'd have been able to was to essentially get lucky with the outdoor caravanners, and since the destruction of Harmattan at the hands of the Rust Lich didn't concern me in any capacity, I just never bothered going there. The backpack problem leads me to another point. In dungeons, since deployment mid-combat was nigh impossible, I had to throw these things down somewhere safe and lure enemies to the chimes and drum, which was just fucking annoying, so again, I just didn't bother. Then, unlike in my Merton run, I actually did damage with this build and would do even more with other gear acquired in a bit, so the damage from Ether Bomb was almost negligible, or it just didn't fucking happen in the first place, and I didn't have a reliable way of proccing Holy Blaze as well. So essentially, if anything, getting these two things down and hitting them instead of the enemy decreased my overall DPS, so I was just better off not using the instruments if I wanted to deal damage. Then, lastly, I got Reverberation instead of Nurturing Echo, as I didn't really need the defensive utility. Reverberation is a dogshit skill. When it works, it's alright, deals some nice AoE damage, but it almost never fucking does. Most of the time I use it, lose stamina, the skill goes on cooldown, and nothing happens. Like, at that point even fucking Talus Cleaver is better. Also, again, back to the point of these things weighing a fuck ton, either I use the skill mid-combat and suddenly have an extra 6 Miyazakis in my pocket, which will get me killed, or I pick up my backpack and try to use the skill so the totem goes into my backpack, which will also get me killed. All of this to say, I was right putting this in 9th place in my skill tree ranking. I really don't see how you use this skill tree without hating your life in a run that doesn't desperately need the survivability. At least I was able to set up a pretty nicely kitted out camp. Anyways, I found the Barrier Armor chest piece. That's pretty cool. Wow, some more dungeon crawling, and then I began the process of trying to acquire the Rusted Spear, for which I needed the arc to be above the storage area tower thingy. I slept a bunch until that was the case, did the puzzle like the true genius that I am, and got the spear. Spears are for pussies. Now, to get it upgraded to the weapon I actually wanted, Shriek, I would have to head to the Sulfuric Caverns, but first I headed back to camp to sleep. It had been longer than 7 days. My mentally stunted ass completely fucking forgot about area resets. Well, farewell luxurious tent, all the loot and especially all the spiny meringues I had laboriously cooked up, and Zorn's backpack was gone too, so I guess my food will just rot from this point onwards. Great. I now have Shriek though. Yay! Also, Silvertooth sold the Entombed chest piece, so at least I'm dripped out while starving. With this set, I set at 60% decay resistance, and with the help of the Possessed Boon and Hermit, 95%. Shriek is an incredibly strong weapon, dealing 70 base damage. That's just 8% less than a fucking Tsar spear, and it's of course much faster and even longer, I think. However, it inflicts poison on me. Also, it inflicts plague on enemies, which is basically extreme poison in AoE. This AoE also applies to me. That means that in prolonged encounters I run the chance of taking 5 decay damage per second, so obviously reaching or at least getting close to 100% decay resist is essential to benefit off of this weapon. However, the Entomber armor, as good as it is, isn't optimal for that, so I made my way to the marsh and set up camp in the giant's village. Is this a town? Yes. Do they judge Seamus O'Sheen based on his hair color and violent propensities? No. So it's fine. From here I switched back to the Starchild Claymore and cleared out the Dark Ziggurat, which, as most enemies here deal decay damage and are weak to lightning, was pretty easy. I rode the elevator down to the Plague Doctor. My ghost committed Sudoku, I resummoned him, buffed up, and yeah, he got absolutely shocked in the ass. As a reward for consentingly railing him, I got the Jade Lich armor, which besides making me immune to decay damage with the possessed boon, also buffed my decay damage by a massive 35%. Now, in terms of other defenses and stamina, it was vastly inferior to the Entomber armor, but only pussies care about that. Real men with real cocks only care about massive damage numbers. I then got absolutely hammered, waking up still unable to tell left from right and up from down. Seriously, what the fuck happened here? I've never seen this before. At this point, I had nothing else to do really, so I headed back to Enmerkar, freed Kirak without doing any of the optional stuff, and then went back to Levant to report to Sarid and get the fuck out of that disgusting city again. Subsequently, I rebuilt my stockpile of masochism noodles, almost died to some assassin bugs because I was too fucking cheap to use a health potion, killed the Compass Guardian. Again, I was just waiting for time to pass so I could start Sank Corsairs. Now, I mentioned previously how this playstyle was really fun in the beginning, but now that I had essentially completed my build and couldn't really progress at all in that regard, it became abundantly clear that the game just isn't designed to accommodate this type of playstyle. The main gameplay loop usually revolves around, going into a dungeon, looting everything, going back to city and selling shit, but what the fuck would I need the money for? And it's not like your basic necessities are urgent enough that it forces you to constantly be out hunting. You can just, again, stockpile shit and it's probably enough. Regardless, got Sank Corsair started, and there doesn't seem to be a timer or other drastic fail conditions, so all I could do in an attempt to get my social credit lowered was to kill Zargus. He's got an immense, man-cutting sword that will make short work of any and all that dare oppose him. He was to be my most challenging encounter yet, so I did all I could to prepare. I got Clayton to grant me a favor, as doing so makes Mouth's defeat easier to fail, which I started this time after just sleeping a bunch. There really wasn't anything else to do in Abrasar. Well, I did pick up a warbow. I thought that it would come in handy due to it inflicting confusion, but I don't recall using it a single fucking time. Not because it's bad, but because I couldn't be bothered. At this point, I went into hibernation so as to have the 25-day timer on Mouth's defeat expire. That resulted in all of my meringue rotting again. Great. I did my utmost, but sadly, all the people in the slums starved. Oh my fucking god, I pulled something in my neck. Fucking out. How? What happens when you don't go inside? Fucking hell. Well, except these two, they are still relevant to the plot, so they get to live. But hey, they sat down somewhere else. I've never seen that before. Now, time for the last quest. Whoa. And no, this isn't something that I screwed up while editing or scripting. There really just wasn't any fucking momentum towards the end. just nothing going on anymore. I made my way over to the docks and did such an incredible job convincing Izan that he gifted me his garbage-ass weapon. Thanks, what a cool guy. Then, as martial law had gone into effect, I run around unsure what the fuck else to do. As usually, you talk to Pigeon Eye, but Pigeon Eye had hawked his last tour, so there was no one to distract the guards. Luckily, the Levantine army hadn't been supplied with enough Gamer Subs breast milk flavor, so they were severely dehydrated. This gave me the opportunity to bribe them with a water skin, and I could enter the palace. I fought long and hard against Cyrene, then arrived in Monsoon. I set up my drum and chimes in a location I thought would be convenient for both the normal Immaculates as well as the Butcher, then spam, read the engaging dialogue, didn't get a Tsar Stone, and entered the final fight. The instruments were misplaced egregiously, so I didn't use them, and I didn't need to. This was way too fucking easy. Also, despite my best efforts, or rather, lack thereof, I still got the full Zargus armor. How the fuck did that happen? Not like it matters, because that's it. No. Could I do the DLCs? I don't know. Both DLC questlines fundamentally revolve around saving cities, so doing them is completely antithetical to what this run is about. Also, as you have probably noticed towards the end here, character progression is basically over at this point. Outside of just a boring old whiplash enchantment or whatever, there really isn't anything else to be gained from the DLCs, and it's not like this build leaves any questions pertaining to whether I'd be able to beat the final bosses or not. The Merton run was significantly harder. Anyways, if you liked this run, which admittedly towards the end I didn't, like and subscribe and all of that. More videos to come, probably the all access ranking, I'm already working on that, and then some challenge runs, I don't know, something. Okay, bye.